As so often, the protest started out peacefully. Crowds gathered to sing what has become the anthem of the protest movement, Glory to Hong Kong. The atmosphere was largely festive as protesters filled all the free spaces in the shopping mall. Some folded paper origami birds as a symbol of hope and peace. Then they produced a Chinese flag and began trampling on it in a clear provocation aimed at Beijing. The sense of anger here is very real.
Even if we're very tired, we can't give up our rights. We're entitled to them.
Towards evening, tempers flared as some protesters began vandalising a subway station linked to the mall. Riot police then moved in to clear the building, and the confrontation moved out onto the street. Once again, the police used tear gas to clear the crowds and made a number of arrests. The two sides have been facing off for nearly 4 months. The protesters accuse Beijing and the Hong Kong authorities of undermining the city's democracy. While many demonstrators are peaceful, others say resorting to violence is the only way to be heard.
Some protesters are using force and clashing with the government. Both methods of demonstrating are important. It's not that one matters more than the other.
The demonstrators were also planning to disrupt travel to Hong Kong's international airport, but a massive police presence meant that did not materialise. Still, the protesters are vowing to keep up their fight.
Correspondent Mathias Bölinger has been covering the unrest in Hong Kong for us. He spoke to us about Sunday's protests in and around the mall.
Clashes have ended here. Behind me, what you see there is the remainers of a barricade that was earlier on fire before the protesters had gathered in a shopping mall just near here. They have chanted there for several hours and put up posters and slogans. Then at some point there were photos circulating on the net that police was approaching. Things escalated. Demonstrators damaged some of the property or some of the interior of this mall and set up barricades, and then they left. And outside here they clashed with the police, with the protesters setting up barricades on fire and the police firing tear gas. This quickly ended. What we are seeing now is a pattern that the protesters gather together, they set up barricades, they throw things at the police to provoke them, and once the police advances they quickly disappear and the police tries to run after them to make maybe 1 or 2 arrests, but basically most protesters disappear and then they reassemble in another part of town. This is how protests have been going through the past few weeks.
We hear that there have been other actions involving an orchestra playing, for instance, some origami being done, all kinds of individual things taking place, you know, quite apart from these eye-catching scenes. Are they coordinated?
If you ask whether somebody's pulling the strings or whether there's an organization behind, whether this is somehow organized by somebody, then the answer is no. But they are, of course, coordinated. People coordinate themselves in internet forums. Somebody makes a suggestion, hey, let's do origami. They were folding storks, as they were saying it is a symbol of hope and peace. Or somebody just throws up the idea to pull out all the reservation vouchers from the restaurants. The restaurants were somehow accused of being pro-China, and then they made these ribbons out of these vouchers. So there is some kind of a spontaneous coordination. Also, somebody throws up an idea or a plan, and then they publish it on these forums, and then people sometimes vote it up and down, or they just go. So there is no centralized organization behind it, but there is, of course, some kind of coordination.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of creativity as well. But tell me, Mathias, is there fatigue on the part of the Hong Kong public over these disturbances, which have gone into their 15th week now?
if you look at the numbers of people who attend protests, these are going down. Many people who showed up in the beginning are not going anymore, not as regularly, but this is something you would expect. There has been a part of the public is firmly opposed to these protests. These are those people who gather at the pro-police or pro-China rallies. Sometimes their number is usually quite smaller than those pro-democracy protesters. What we are seeing in polls that have been conducted recently is that the public overwhelmingly blames police on the violence. 70% of Hong Kongers have said in a recent poll that they think police are using excessive violence, while only 40% have said that the protesters are using excessive violence. These were not mutually exclusive questions, and that trust in the government is very low at this moment. The government, on a scale of 1 to 10, almost half of the participants of this poll gave the government 0 points of trust in this poll. So there is maybe not as much active support for the protesters as there has been, but the public is still more leaning towards the protesters than the government.
All right, Mathias Bölinger from Hong Kong. Thanks for that.